Good morning and welcome to Goodlord's webinar today. After with me, Ollie Sherlock, Head of Insurance here at Goodlord, and Paul Shamplina, for the first time, I think, to one of our post-COVID-19 webinars. It's really good to have you this morning, Paul. Just take a minute or two to sort of intro yourself. I'm sure pretty much most people in the industry know you, but for those who don't, who's Paul Shamplina?
Thanks, Ollie, and a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, I'm Paul Shamplina. I'm the founder of Landlord Action. Started the company 20 years ago. So we help landlords and letting agents with problem tenants. We're a regulated firm of solicitors. Been doing this for a long time, all for fixed fees, act for numerous letting agents. And then 3 years ago, Hamilton Fraser, the insurance brokers, bought Landlord Action. And now I'm brand ambassador and director of Hamilton Fraser. So we own brands such as My Deposits, the Property Redress Scheme, Client Money Protect, which are obviously well-known letting agent brands. We own Landlord Zone, Total Landlord Insurance. We've just started a letting agent advice line called HF Assist and a mediation business. So we're there to support landlords and letting agents exactly like Goodlord.
And from Hamilton Fraser's point of view, you're right in the middle of a lot of the work that's being taken out in regards to legislation changes and particularly sort of breaking legislation changes in regards to COVID-19, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we've got the various directors that we're all on various different consultations. I've been involved in the banning of Section 21, advising on that, and housing courts and deposits. And our legal director, Tim Frome, from Landlord Action and the Property Redress Scheme, is advising with regard to pre-action protocol at the moment, which is going to be coming in, which we'll touch on later on. But yeah, I was involved in the drafting of the Form 6A and also giving evidence on retaliation eviction. So yeah, there's always something in our business. We're engaging with the government at all times.
And that's one of the reasons, apart from the fact you're a massive Spurs fan, which I recognise to be an endearing quality. One of the main reasons.
I knew you would mention Spurs during the podcast.
One of the main reasons why we were keen to sort of welcome you onto webinar today, because today's webinar is about managing the new COVID-19 legislation, and I conducted a webinar about 2 weeks ago on some of the initial changes and some of the changes that we thought were going to happen and how we thought to sort of navigate some of those. Obviously, 2 weeks on, we have more clarity than we did 2 weeks ago, and I think if we go forward again another 2 weeks, we'll probably be in the same position. Hence why hopefully these sessions are so helpful to the letting agents that have joined. So today we're going to sort of talk through how we can manage those changes. And just before I do that, I recognise out of the 800 plus agents who sort of registered for the webinar, some of you may not use Goodlord at the moment. So if we go on to the next slide, I can just talk through a little bit of what Goodlord does very briefly. This isn't a pitch webinar. We're not here to sell you Goodlord. It's really to give you some context behind our position in the market, and maybe that sort of qualifies our understanding a little bit more. Goodlord is an end-to-end letting software platform. It helps you manage the entire pre-tenancy process in one place, whether that be from starting an initial inquiry through to taking the payment for the deposit. We automate all of the documentation processes and obviously all of the payment processes as well. Along with that, we have a marketplace within Goodlord that can supply the necessary products that you may need through that journey, whether that be utilities, rent protection, tenants insurance, whether that be further things like utilities and media, for example. They're all combined as part of this journey within the platform. And obviously what we've seen in the last month or so is that the necessity to have some kind of tech within your business to help you work remotely has obviously increased. So we believe we're well placed to really support letting agents in that sort of challenge, I suppose, in maintaining the business continuity through COVID-19, but also to really ensure that compliance virtues are met at every single step of the way. And we'll come on to a little bit more about what compliance virtues we have to meet and why they're so important, obviously through the webinar. If you want to find more about Goodlord or find out more about Goodlord and what we do, please visit our website, and there'll be a link later on that you can follow if you want to book a demo on the platform and see how it works. Enough about Goodlord and what we do. Let's get into the agenda of what we're going to cover today for you, and sort of hopefully talk you through how we can sort of support you and Paul's advice on how you can navigate some of these changes. We're going to discuss payment plans. You may well have seen that we sent out to all of our customers and the wider market yesterday a bundle of templates, of letters, emails that you can send to tenants when, say, managing rent or missed rent payments. We also sent out a bundle around the payment plan template itself. We gave you a copy of that. And we also built something called a rent relief questionnaire, which we'll come on to again shortly. We're going to cover payment plans. We're going to talk about landlords and mortgage payments and how to best advise landlords through this period of time. I think it was Christopher Watkin who put out an interesting piece of the week in terms of stating, you know, your landlords and tenants won't forget how you feel, how you make them feel through this process. And I think communication throughout is key, and that's going to be a common thread through this webinar today. We know that a lot of you manage student lets, and that's probably a large area of concern in terms of how to manage those processes, and also the reactionary processes that students themselves have gone through because of COVID-19. So we'll cover that for you as well. We'll then move on to serving notices and how to do that and what needs to be done. And importantly, we'll cover current and new court proceedings. I think if we were to take a poll of all the questions we've had in the last couple of weeks, the majority of them have come through regarding current and new court proceedings. There's a fear there that it's a bit of the unknown. So Paul's going to talk us through exactly what he's in that realm. We'll go on to the pre-tenancy process as well. So, you know, part of the things that you need to make sure you keep doing in order to get that tenancy set up, and the things that are most important. And hoping that we have time at the end for a Q&A. It's been great to see that so many of you sent so many questions in regarding parts of this webinar. If we don't get round to that, or indeed we run out of time through talking about the slides, what we'll do is we will answer each of your questions. We can see who's asked them and who sent them in. I will come back to you in writing on each one to make sure that that point's covered. I'm hoping if we don't have time, though, most of the questions, if not all, are covered through the slides that we'll go through today. Cool. Okay, so let's get into it. Before we do that, we obviously did. I don't know if some of you will be aware, as our customers, we did a market research process over the last couple of weeks, just to understand the temperature within the market. And since March the 11th, agents have seen a 2% increase in properties still owing rent after 7 days, and that's from 4% to 6%. We recognise that other findings out there are reporting a lot higher. We're not saying it's not going to climb, but that's certainly what our agents are displaying based on a survey of over 20,000 rented homes across England. We've also recognised through that research that 4% of tenants in these properties have agreed a payment plan. To us, that's a positive result, and Paul will talk a little bit of time around how we need to support tenants and what necessity there to do so is under the legislation. But that number is encouraging, and we foresee that rising as people understand more about what they can and can't do and what the options are. And again, hopefully today will help with that. Finally, agents are reporting confusion from tenants, and that's not unlikely. We expect that to a certain degree. Not all of the news that we speak about in industry is mass news out to tenants and landlords outside the industry. And actually, it's probably our job to help support that messaging and really deliver some clean, concise advice to tenants and landlords to avoid any confusion being caused. Obviously, the backdrop of this is that we do expect tenants to be under more hardship, more financial hardship moving forwards, at least over the next 6 to 12 months. And we've maintained, obviously, the provision of our rent protection product to ensure that our agents can protect themselves against that, if that were the case. In line with tenants falling into hardship, Paul, let's talk about payment plans, and let's get into the body of the webinar. How important is it now, not only from a legislation point of view, but also from a customer care point of view, that letting agents are enabling landlords and tenants to work together?
You know what? Let me just start off by saying a good tenant doesn't turn into a bad tenant overnight. Okay. Throughout this whole crisis, the letting agent has to show that they're being proactive, show that they have skills of negotiation with regard to mediation, being clear, updating landlords, speaking to tenants. Every tenancy is different. every tenant's circumstance is going to be different. Okay, you would also, and I speak to agents and landlords every day, you would also, Ollie, see tenants also trying it on. Okay, you have to have some sort of clarity, some sort of proof. You know, the majority of tenants out there are really good tenants, they're very truthful, but actually if their circumstances have changed because of COVID-19, the reason why the law change came into effect was no tenant should be evicted if their circumstances change because of COVID-19. Actually, I agree with that. I've had a little bit of stick in the press by that, but I actually think, you know, I've worked in recessions, I've helped landlords for 27 years, I am a landlord. This is totally unprecedented. You know, how you act as a business and more so as a letting agent will define you coming out the back end of how a landlord, how a tenant perceives you. Okay, I say to landlords, I say to letting agents, it's better to get something rather than nothing. Okay, it's going to take you 6 to 9 months to evict a tenant. Okay, and of course you need to make sure that case is genuine. So firstly, as an agent, you know, we all you are there to piece together the landlord and the tenant, because obviously if you're doing full management, the landlord has no contact with the tenant. They don't know them. All they know is from what went through the reference and your communication. So updating and giving clear updates with regard to the tenant's position on a by daily or a weekly update is important, because the landlords have to budget. Okay, so yes, you have to work together, and everyone's in it all together, because don't forget, I'm going to come on to this, the next slide, your landlords are going to be struggling as well. Okay, it's not just tenants.
And I think that's almost the risk, isn't it, of a lot of the commentary, that we forget the landlord in this process, because the tenant, of course, is the main focus, given the fact that they're the ones who pay the rent, and in some ways help support all the rest of the ecosystem, of course, because that's where the letting agent gets their money from, where the landlord benefits from, or pays their mortgage. But landlords do have a significant part to play here, and I suppose there could be a risk whereby letting agents have all the right intentions of trying to allow the landlord to support the tenant, but the landlord just won't budge. And how would you manage that situation? Because from a legal point of view, it's fair to suggest that, you know, ultimately, if you are having to go down the worst possible route, I evict the tenant because they've not been able to pay the rent, you are going to have to show that ultimately you've followed a protocol that allows and supports the tenant as much as possible. So for those letting agents that are struggling with landlords to get them on side for that potentially, how should they approach that?
So that's a really good question. So there is going to be changes, and I'm going to touch on this slide because it is relevant. With a landlord has to be guided by a letting agent. A letting agent has to educate the landlord. Okay, I have been inundated, and as you know, we own Landlord Zone. We get 250,000 views a month on there, and I've actually just run a section with Nigel Lewis. Every Friday we've got something called Landlord Hero. It's actually Landlord Hero at landlordzone.co.uk, where landlords are doing some great things for their tenants. But of course, you don't hear that in the news. You're hearing organisations like Tenants Union doing campaigns where actually there should be free rent for 3 months, you know, and you hear about rent holidays. You know, it's not rent holidays, it's deferred payment. Every case is different. A tenant should not be paying more than 1/3 of their wages towards rent with regard to affordability. You as an agent need to investigate to see if hardship has happened and it is real, and get some sort of documentation. Have they been furloughed? Are they applying for universal credit? Have they applied for some sort of business loan? You need to get some sort of confirmation of that, because the landlord needs to know, because they might be struggling to pay their mortgage as well. So the communication line is really important, because what happens is the landlord, I get landlords, and don't forget we own the property redress scheme, and we do a complaint about letting agents, where a landlord will say, well, what have they done for their full management? You know, you're going to have a line of communication, albeit agents working remotely, and they've had to really be creative working with their business. You need to convince the landlord to be able to have some sort of mediation in place, and that there will be a payment plan, and that the tenants can pay, because there is a sustainability. You have to sustain that tenancy agreement, because if you think about it, 6 to 9 months is the reality of evicting a tenant, and we'll come on to that in court proceedings later on. You don't want to void property, which will be empty for ages, okay, which is an issue as well. You want a tenant, and actually this is a scenario where people will be judged through this crisis, whatever industry they're in, and this can actually strengthen a landlord's and tenants relationship, and out of this a tenant may stay longer, which is what you want, and what a letting agent is providing to a landlord. I mean, as I said at the beginning, we've literally launched yesterday tenantsmediation.theprs.co.uk. We've got a mediation service where landlords and agents, they've got nowhere to turn because they're in this void period. They don't want to issue court proceedings because it's going to take too long, and they need to have a payment plan in place. So we have mediators at the property redress scheme that are now working and communicating with landlords and tenants. A big issue, Ollie, is tenants bury their head in the sand and they won't communicate with you, which is a real issue for agents as well.
And I think we've recognised that through our claims process and our rent protection book. And one of the things we've done is invest quite heavily in that process. And part of the results that the industry saw yesterday in terms of things like the rent relief questionnaire, for example, have come from that process. And what we've found is that the first round of communications, tenants may well look to ignore, are confused, don't know what to do, think actually there's going to be an immediate action. And what we've noticed actually, if you can monitor and manage the messaging to a degree that is very supportive and very sympathetic, and utilising things like the term rent relief, that's ultimately what we're looking to do. Not looking to evict you from a property, we're looking to help you in a time of need. And we've noticed actually the engagement then from tenants is vast. It's a huge flip side from an email from Goodlord or a letting agent saying we're looking to understand or chase rent to actually we're here to help. And
Correct.
We've certainly tried to urge letting agents and landlords to think mid to long term. And I recognise that a payment plan on the face of it might look great if the tenant's agreeing to it, but the body of that payment plan is going to be super important, isn't it? Because if indeed the initial 3-month relief then adds so much pressure onto the tenant long term, it's almost counter beneficial then to the landlord themselves. What should agents really be looking out for in terms of a payment? You mentioned 30% earlier, which is an amount we recognise in our sort of claims process. But also, how should they be viewing, say, renewal of contracts during that term and spreading payments over a longer amount of time?
So you know what? And of course, what a letting agent doesn't know and a landlord doesn't know is what are the outgoings of the tenant. Because what's happening is you'll do a reference, 6-12 months down the line, they might have got more credit, they might have had more expense, and you don't know. And of course, they've got families. There's a whole lot of expenditure. You don't have a real true sight of all that expenditure, and you only get that expenditure if the tenant offers it to you. And very rarely they're going to offer that to you, and that's going to be an issue. Yes, you can do credit checks and see if they've got car finance and various different things. So you know what? The conversation and the wording at the beginning is yes, we want to help is important. I do see a lot of challenges for letting agents with landlords that won't budge, and I'm seeing the ones, the twos, the threes, property owning landlords are most probably the more challenging. And they say no, they're 1 day late. I want my £1,300 a month, and it's really up to the agent to say, you know what, you've got to be realistic here, because if you go to court and press the button, it's going to take you 6 to 9 months and cost you £1,500. And then you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 months, 9 months rent added on top. Let them pay off. Let's see what they can afford, and then that's why our mediation service will be really, really busy with mediators, because it's also it's hard for the letting agent because yes, they're in the middle. Effectively, their client is the landlord. I don't know if attitudes have changed as well since the tenant fee ban. I've seen a lot of attitudes changing from agents about, they're not paying us a fee, and it's them and us. And you know what? No tenant, no rent, no landlord, no letting agent. Exactly what you said beforehand. So working a payment plan, seeing that they can pay it off over a certain amount of time, that actually might result in a renewal of a tenancy agreement. But obviously it's got to be realistic, because of course that money has to be paid back. Yes, you're going to have a deposit, which is 5 weeks. Okay, could be offset against the rent arrears, but it may not be enough. So it's about managing in the short crisis time, but thinking medium to long term, exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, and obviously you are at the beck and call to a certain extent of your landlord. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about sort of landlord and mortgage payments and how to manage those. I mean, from a landlord's perspective and agent's perspective, I stated 2 weeks ago, on the back of a question from a letting agent asking whether they should reduce their fee during this period of time. And I can see why a letting agent would maybe want to do that as a gesture of goodwill, because maybe less rent is coming in, etc. My argument to that was actually the letting agents now become more important than ever before. We deal, as a lot of you will know, with DAS, and they also manage different books of insurance with direct insurers. And the conduit of a letting agent is so vital to help explain and support tenants and landlords away from the confusion they're maybe under at the moment, but also to really understand both sides of that coin. And I think, and I strongly believe, that letting agents have devalued themselves for too long, frankly. You know, if you're a good letting agent, a 7-8% fee is frankly too small. But right now, you're earning your fee if you're doing all the right things, and you should clearly be able to justify that. And there's going to be a lot of hard work that goes into landlord conversations around payment plans, around changes in legislation. They may well have expected to get their property back in 3 to 4 months. You know, that's probably not going to happen moving forwards. So from a landlord's perspective, trying not to double up down here on the previous slide, what should landlords consider? Because the options I see available to them are, you know, accept the terms that a tenant's putting forward based on as much understanding as you've got. Try to go to court, but it's going to be an extremely lengthy process. Alternatively, look to allow a tenant to vacate earlier than maybe planned if they've got a safe haven to go to, mum and dad's, for example, potentially. But also then understand that could set the market for a month or two before you can re-let it out. So as a landlord, Paul, which you are, what are the things you'll be considering at this moment in time if you've got a tenant in a maybe dire situation?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm a landlord, I've got a letting agent. You're quite right. Letting agents undervalue themselves too much. Okay, I do talks on how to retain and how to attract new landlords to your business. I go into various different letting agents' offices all the time with a different mindset of a landlord. You know what you've got. What you've got to be thinking about now is you're still doing your work. You know, I had a question on Landlord Zone saying, well, my agent wants to take the full fee. I mean, that's entirely up to the agent, what they want to do and how they want to do. But I think they're working just as hard, if not harder. Yeah. But if a letting agent explains actually what they do in more detail and how much time it takes in managing a property and explain that to a landlord wouldn't quibble. But if you divide the full management of 8% over 12 months, it's peanuts, absolutely peanuts. You know, where my motto as a landlord and for landlords, no news is good news. You know, as long as your rent's being paid in, you know, and most landlords don't want to deal with the tenants. That's why they're using letting agents. And statistically, and it is a fact, a tenant will stay in a property longer if it's fully managed by a letting agent. You know, the average term of a tenancy is what, 4 years and 3 months. But in this crisis, as a landlord, what would I be worrying about? Well, yes, I'd be worrying about is my tenant going to be able to make the payment. I'm worried about my tenant calling me because if they're going to call me for this crisis, I know it's not good news. Okay, but let's look at the reality. You know, like I said, at Landlord Action, we're running hundreds of cases. We've got 10 solicitors and paralegals doing cases. We've got literally 500 to 600 cases on hold at the moment at court, Ollie. Okay, yeah. Your tenant, you don't have to. If you don't want to pay me, you don't have to pay me. Simple as. I can't do anything about it. I can't come round to you and put a gun to your head and do the back's payment over to me. I can't do anything. You know, I've got a tenancy agreement and then I'm relying on the court system, which at the moment effectively is suspended and broken. And we don't know what the pile up and the backlog's going to be at the end of this when it's lifted. And we'll touch on that after. So you have to think about, are they going to pay the rent? What can I accept in the meantime? Okay. And every landlord is different. You've got 2 million landlords. 90% of them have got 1, 2, 3 properties. Okay, all their circumstances are different. You don't know how different and what's going on in their life and how desperate they are for the money. So every case is going to be different. And you as an agent have to know your landlords just as well as you know your tenants. And you've got to put that in. But then the things I'm worried about is I can't get my tenant out. Yes, I'll accept. You know, I look at the other side of it. I've spoke to tenants where landlords just aren't playing ball whatsoever, and they've been in properties 3, 4, 5 years. You know, and that annoys me. You know. And we literally have to work together. I would worry, Ollie, at this stage about void periods. I'd worry that if the tenant left, and albeit they're paying 500 quid a month left for 2-3 months, but I know they've been a good tenant. I've had no complaints. They've looked after the property. They've been there 3 years. I've renewed the tenancy 3 years, you know, and I say, right, you're going to leave. A lot of tenants and a lot of agents got to realise is a lot of tenants won't be able to move, because once they took that tenancy agreement out, and then since COVID-19's come in, their life's been shattered. Their work, their jobs, their work has completely changed. They've stopped earning money, and actually, where can they go? Because if they are going to try and go, unless they go to mum and dad, they've got to be referenced again, and their referencing and their credit rating is going to be dropping down, and they've got to find month's rent, month's deposit. So
isn't that the point there, Paul?
Isn't
that the point as well in terms of tenant engagement? And that's kind of the messaging, I think, that it's so vital to say to tenants that actually, from a landlord perspective, you know, one, we want you to stay if you can. Two, if you can't, then actually there is this option there to vacate. However, I'm telling you this as a letting agent or landlord because I want to ensure you're protecting your future interests as much as possible. You know, it's all well and good staying in a property, but amounting that debt, if the worst then does happen and you get taken to court, you know, the reality is you're going to find it even harder then to rent a property thereafter. So it is about a support network there for the tenants to a certain degree and explaining what the repercussions, I suppose, of each action is. And I think that's where I recognise that from a letting agent point of view, with their link to either a company like Goodlord or indeed another tenant referencing supplier, for example, you've got the validation process there. But again, that could change over time too. And, you know, the landlord does have, they do have actions they can take, and they can be proactive if they want to. And one of those things, of course, is one of the early announcements from the government around the changes that the landlords and obviously owners can make to their mortgage terms, the lenders. Now, you've experienced part of this process already with some of your clients. How should landlords be communicating with their lenders around sort of looking to take a mortgage deferment?
That's a really good question. So I'm actually doing a webinar actually with Kate Faulkner next Tuesday for a mortgage lender. So that's and I'm going to be talking about the same thing. So what happened was the government initially, before the legislation came in for COVID-19, mentioned about rent holidays. That's what confused everyone. So then tenants were thinking, oh, I'm going to have a holiday, not literally a holiday because we're in lockdown, but obviously I'm going to have a rent holiday and I don't have to pay the rent. Well, no, you're liable for the rent. And actually, if you are struggling and your circumstances change, we advise that you speak to your landlords and encourage them to try and speak to their lenders because of your circumstances, because they're not going to get the rent because you have to apply for benefit and it's not going to come through to June or whatever. Actually, proof has got to be given, and then speaking to a lender, okay, then you'll say to the lender, look, I'm struggling. I mean, let's be clear about this. There's a lot of landlords that don't want to make that call to the lenders because they are worried.
Sorry, Paul. Is that a double prong process then? Actually, so you have to show the tenant hasn't paid the rent, and you have to show
COVID-19.
And you then have to show that you are therefore in financial hardship at the same time. And does it differ from lender to lender?
It will differ from lender to lender, and there's been conflicting information. The FCA have said if you take a 3-month payment deferment on your mortgage, because don't forget, you still got to pay it back, and most probably they're going to charge interest on it. Let's not be naive. Is it going to affect my credit rating as a landlord? Okay. Now, I spoke to this mortgage lender literally yesterday when we were going through the slides, and she said if you're going to do if a landlord is going for a remortgage, which a lot of them will do, you know, what will happen is they will look at the remortgage application for the last 12 months, and if it shows that there's 2-3 months, that could affect their credit rating. So it's been quite ambiguous, and no one really knows. But there are lenders that I mean, we did a survey on Landlord Zone, and 36% of them said that they would struggle with their mortgage if they didn't get payment within a couple of months, because there's a lot of landlords out there and who will be customers and clients of your letting agents that are one payment away from struggling to pay their mortgage, you know, to cover their costs and stuff. So you've got to, as a landlord and as you as a letting agent, having these conversations with landlords, and it will go a long way with you and your landlords, because you're educating them and asking them and telling them what they should be doing. Is you've got to try and get through on the various helpline for the lender, And then you've got to be able to be honest with them and say, look, I am struggling, if you know, and I can do this and I can pay that. And you know, the tenant's only giving me £600 this month. Can I pass that over? And you know, and transparency. So they are saying it, but the word I know, and it hasn't been clarified yet, the word holiday, I believe, is going to be taken out of the legislation. It's going to be called deferred, because as I said, if you go on Landlords, and we broke some stories on there with Nigel Lewis, the tenants union got a petition of over 100,000 tenants to say that they should have a 3-month rent holiday, you know, and they've been campaigning, and I mean, obviously every landlord's different. Most, you know, we're talking about institutional landlords.
This plays into the narrative that all landlords are sat with massive compounds and multi-millionaires, and actually they're untouchable. And, you know, we know that's complete nonsense. And I think from a landlord's perspective, you know, it is not unfair to some degree put self-interest as part of the conversation, because they have to make sure they're protecting themselves. And therefore, you know, I think, you know, I doff my cap, as it were, to the government for the legislation they brought in, because without that, this would be even a harder conversation. But I suppose they also need to understand that there is certain processes they're going to have to go through, and because that causes them financial hardship, or because 20% of rent isn't paid, and therefore they're down a little bit on their return to investment. It's not going to help a legal process thereafter, and they have to be down to supporting the tenant. Whether we like that or not, whether we agree with it, is kind of separate. It's more a case of there's a set process you need to go through, and I would hope for the people who saw the documentation we sent out yesterday, that's helpful. But they have to do that.
I think, Ollie, what is really important is people have short memories, right? So, like I said, I've been, you know, I issued my first possession claim when I worked in a firm of solicitor in 1991, right? A long time ago. You're supposed to say you don't look old enough, but it's a long time ago, okay? But you've got to realise that buy-to-let changed in 2002, 2003, you know, the game changed. Landlords, let's be very honest, you know, you'll have different landlords agents, you have different landlords, you have your accidentals, you have people gearing up, all different levels. Landlords have had cheap money for 12, 13, 14 years, right? It's very cheap to borrow money. Rents have gone sky high, okay? And my motto in life, right, not that you can be facetious enough to say this to your landlords, but you can't eat steak every day of the week. I know you do, Ollie, obviously, but you know, you've got to have, sometimes you've got to have egg and chips. What I'm saying to you is, everyone falls on hard times. I've had hard times. Everyone falls on hard times, you know, and people remember things. You know, we see things online about these shops that are charging, you know, 20 quid for 4 toilet rolls, and, you know, just disgusting behaviour. And, you know, what I'm saying to you is, work with landlord, work with tenant, agent, educate your landlord, explain timeframes, explain this is the best option for you. Get them to come round to it. You will have resistance from landlords saying, no, the contract says this. Look, to enforce a contract and to go to court, it's going to cost you 6 to 9 months. Do you want to wait that long and cheese the tenant off? Because what doesn't help, right, this is another thing, is you have tenant and you have landlord. You know, is the word landlord a bit outdated now, Ollie? I'm a lord and I own land, and you're my tenant. You know, well, they're customers, and I know that's how you look at it. And you know, your tenants are your customers, and you have to change mindset with landlords. The game has changed in renting.
And I think, you know, I certainly recognise that the agents that we interact with are on that level, and aligned with that thinking. And you know, I think there's very few cases, I'm pleased to report, whereby I've seen activity that maybe goes against the kind of the moral compass. We've seen one regarding a nurse, which I felt was a bit inappropriate, given also what they're doing, you know, at the moment. But they're very few and far between. But I suppose one of the sectors where landlords are probably most affected, or have been most initially affected, is the student sector, because we've seen obviously COVID-19 come, we've seen lockdown being enacted, and of course, you know, understandably, students have up sticks and they've moved maybe back home or centralised somewhere else. So we can go on to the next slide, please, Sophia. You know, what's the view in terms of how landlords and letting agents should manage absconding tenants from a student perspective? What's the best course of action they can take?
Well, you know what, you'll be getting absconding tenants across the board, which happens.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you've got a tenancy agreement. Here's the keys. I'm leaving. You know, you can't stop a tenant from leaving as well, just like you can't stop them from not paying them physically. We're talking about physical.
Of course.
You could carry out action. So the student market, and I said this quite early on when we were in lockdown, in the private rental sector, the student market, HMO market, will be hit the hardest in this crisis. Let me just give you an example. So I act for one of the biggest student landlords in Birmingham. He's got hundreds of units. The last quarter, he's had about 25% default rate, and out of 350 tenants, 300 have gone home.
Yeah.
Right? They've gone home because the universities are shut. So why would they stay in a place when they're not near their family? Which you understand. But they are liable for the rent. And actually, a lot of the time, the good thing in the student market, sometimes they pay up front, and we'll come on to guarantors in a minute. If they leave and they give you the keys, obviously they have to sign a deed of surrender, okay? And you have to agree to a deed of surrender. If they give you the keys and say, I'm leaving, but you still got 4 months left, the conversation you as an agent is, you are still liable for the rent up to the end of the tenancy or until we relet the property. Reality wise, it's going to be hard to relet because it's in a student area. You don't know when the universities reopen. And then of course, I mean, I helped someone out recently on a case. He came to me personally. He's not a friend of mine, and he had people that are leaving. There was 4 students on an AST, all joint and several liable. They all had guarantors, and then of course there's process and standardised letters that go to the guarantors. You are liable for the rent up until vacant possession.
So would you include the guarantor in those very initial conversations as
Yes.
well? Because of course, often their mum, dad, uncle, auntie, in a lot of cases, and they're not going to be naive to the fact that the tenant or the student has moved home because they're probably with them.
Yes.
But there is a process to manage there. And what would your advice be to a letting agent perspective in terms of how you manage that? Because the reality is the academic this year is probably over. And they may well be looking for new accommodation for the next academic year. Should they be looking to settle really and get as much from this process as they can without taking legal action? Should they be saying, well, actually, we've got a contract here. If you're not giving us anything, we really should enforce it. Where should they really look to for that process? Because that legal process will go past the new academic year, won't it?
It will do, but then you have to think. It depends. How are they in the second year of their third year, and they would naturally look to renew anyway. So why would they shoot themselves in the foot? Because if the university is going to reopen in September, let's say in hindsight, most probably, give or take, with all the safe distancing rules and whatever, they're still going to need student accommodation. So landlords have got to bear that in mind. If they go too hard, they need to remind them of their responsibility. Sometimes tenants are paying quarterly. Normally they're signing up on the 1st of July, for the new year. That's when lots of the lets are being done. And I know a lot of student landlords are really worried about those 1st of Julys. Are they going to go ahead? That's a real big worry for the student landlord market. So I think there has to be a considered letter. I wouldn't go too aggressive with the letter. We realise that you've gone back home, but as you know, the rent is due on the 28th of each month. You still have 3 months left. You are still liable for the rent. Bearing in mind, they would have got student loans and they would have had guarantors. I would include the guarantors early in those conversations because it's not going to be a secret to the guarantor because obviously, like you said, they've gone home and they know that they're liable for that rent. Working with it and then actually getting an idea. Are they going to be looking to renew, which most probably they would do if they've got a further term down the line. So don't cut your nose off to spite your face, because what you don't want to do is, yes, I'm going to get the money of the 4 months, because how would you collect it? Well, what would you do? You'll get the property back, so you don't need. I mean, I can tell you now, in my experience with Landlord Action, we hardly ever, I mean, we're running hundreds and hundreds of cases. Most of it is rent arrears or Section 21, which is going to go in due course, as you know, and breach of tenancy, subletting. I think most probably we've done maybe a handful of student cases where we've had to go after guarantors, or it's been in an HMO because they're smoking a bit of wacky backy. There's been a complaint. Other than that, we don't do that because you have the guarantors. So I think there's a fine line knowing, is the tenant, are the students going to renew? If they're going to renew and they're there for another year, well, then you've got pipeline another 12 months income coming in. So just bear that in mind.
And for agencies looking to get set up ready for the next academic year, as they normally would, you know, the coming months will normally be very busy times. How should they prepare for that new academic year? Given, and it's a bit of a moot question point really, because we obviously don't know what's going to happen, right? But is there any? I suppose the better question is there any steps they can take now to protect themselves or indeed prepare themselves for that new process?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a really good question. I think you've got to understand where your, obviously, wherever your student stock is, it's going to be different to another bit of student stock. Obviously, with regard to the university, you're going to be waiting for government guidelines as to when university schools and all that are going to be starting to work again. You know, and of course, it's done every 3 weeks, which doesn't help. Yes, you're going to be getting the properties ready, but I think you've got to be, like anything, all of us have to be versatile, work out the, you know, think out the box, think how you can protect and help your landlord's investments, which is letting. You know, does it have to be a student rental? Can it be another type of rental? You know, can it be switched, you know, to a family? You know, people are still going to move.
Airbnb, sorry, Paul, we're seeing that in the Airbnb world, right? We've seen properties switch their intended purpose initially to, you know, ultimately try and then flood the residential market, which I think will start to see the knock-on effect. So from a student perspective, they obviously have the ability to do that. I suppose it will come down to the state of the property, whether it's fit for purpose, say a family versus four or five individuals, right?
Correct. I mean, you've got to be versatile. And with the Airbnb, you'll see a lot of those Airbnb properties come back to the private rental sector because that market's been decimated. And obviously, you've got to get the travel and tourism coming back. So I think you've got to be versatile with the property, advise, coax, and say to your landlord, look, we don't know. We're still waiting to hear your property, you know, that it's been empty, or we, you know, the tenant hasn't, you know, until you agree a deed of surrender, which means that the contract is ended, that tenant is liable. So you've got to be honest, as a landlord, I would let it run, okay, until I understand what's happening in the next year with regard to the students. What's the pipeline? Where do I normally get my leads from? You know, have it ready, and then actually have your backup plan, which is, you know, can I have it for other sharers? Is it a registered HMO with license? Can it be turned into a family home? Because people are still, one thing I am going to say to you is this market, my prediction, I think rents will come down further down the line in 6 months. That's you know, 6 to 12 months, I think rents will come down. I think, you know, if we didn't have this government intervention of 7, 8, 9 million people furloughed, and and there's universal credit market, which is at 1.2 million since this. I mean, can you imagine if the government didn't step in? It will be absolute carnage. I mean, I think the market will come down a bit. I think the residential market will be okay. I think landlords will be more reasonable with rents because they won't want them to be empty. But I do think that the worst hit market will be the commercial property market, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would agree. And we're certainly still seeing activity. And I think that's testament to the letting agents actually that we work with, frankly. We're seeing agents being quite resilient and looking at new ways where they can do the same job. And, you know, I'd hope that our tech supports that. But in reality, you know, them as individuals and business owners, I've got some really good examples of people making great choices, looking after their staff and still being able to supply a service to the market. And yes, albeit it's 60% odd down on what we'd normally expect. But there is money out there to be made for letting agents at the moment. There is lets that can be completed, and it's a brilliant time to deliver fantastic customer service. And the point I take from you there is that, you know, if you've got a large proportion or a proportion of your business normally students, you could work really closely with those landlords there to flip those into a residential accommodation that's over the course of the next few weeks, perhaps month, hopefully would be able to go back to market.
I think, you know what, I spoke to one agent who's a really good friend of mine. He said business is 90% down across the board. Agents have just been firefighting. I mean, you know, every business is, doesn't matter what you're doing. I mean, you know, we're a supply business. You've been to our office, we've got 220 staff, we're all working remotely, right? You know, how you treat people coming out of this would be important. Not, you know, some agencies have made very rash decisions, I think, from what I've read in the paper, papers. You still got to do stuff. It's got to be remotely. And I think, you know, products like yours of Goodlord, you know, when you are working remotely, they come to the fore, which is obviously protecting people. And actually, more importantly, is, you know, what platforms like yours do. It is dealing with the compliance, and actually it's the date limitation dates. Because if you think about all the dates, all the stuff that you have to remember as a letting agent now, because you are compliance officers, you'll forget. So, you know, back end and good software it has been imperative. I think that highlights more when you work remotely.
One of the biggest points, as I raised when we went through the agenda, is around the new legislation or current legislation and changes to that legislation. And you know, we recognise that the initial messaging was maybe different to then what was detailed in the coronavirus bill. Then the Master of Roles also changed that process to then really bring that in line with the 3-month ban, as it were. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Sophia. We're going to so let's just go through what's inherently changed. What's changed from what we had before COVID-19 to now?
Right. So what happened, and obviously my business, Landlord Action, is right at the heart of it, because obviously it affects us, is there was 2 main changes. There was one change. So any notices served after the 26th of March, Section 8, which is normally a 14-day notice, or Section 21 6A, which was a 2-month notice, now have a 3-month notice period. 3 months. Okay, we are still serving notices at Landlord Action and advising landlords it's going to take a lot longer, but we're saying try mediate beforehand. That's why the pre-action protocol is going to come in further down the line, where you've got to do a whole load of different measures to deal and liaise and work with your tenants, see if they're vulnerable, can they speak English, can they apply for housing benefit. You know, you need to do, I think that's going to be coming in further down the line. I think also, just in my view, the banning of Section 21 will be accelerated. It will come in quicker. You'll see that now. I mean, you know, the housing courts. And so what's changed is there's notices of 3 months. That's it, up until the end of September, okay, which could extend, we don't know. And court proceedings, so live court proceedings have been stayed until the 25th of June, okay? So we've had cases, so as you know, obviously I do the TV program Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords, and we've got our 6th series coming out in June on Channel 5. We were going to do a case where it was an eviction at step 3. That week, the landlord was owed £22,500 rent arrears. Made every mistake in the book, didn't use a letting agent, waited 18 months before taking it, you know, classic horrendous mistakes. 2 days before the eviction, we were going to film at it. What happened was the government announced these measures and they suspended her eviction date. She's got to wait another 3-6 months. All right. Current court proceedings are issues. I would invite, if we just wrote an article yesterday on Landlord Zone about the amount of cases that are stuck in the system, which is pre-COVID-19, and they weren't affected by this crisis. So there's a lot of landlords out there that were struggling beforehand. So no proceedings can be issued, right, and they'll be stayed up until the 25th of June. Then the government will do another review, okay? And I'm not saying they're going to stretch it longer, but after the 25th of June. So we've had Section 21 claims we've sent out to test the water that have come back to us. We've told the landlord we've got to wait until 25th of June. We issue possession claims online called PICO, which is Section 8. We have been issuing those, and they've been going through the system. We've been getting a case number, so we're in the system. The hearing date will be put back. My fear, Ollie, and obviously I sat on the housing court consultation. I had the civil service coming in our office, sitting with Landlord Action for 2 hours. My fear before this crisis was we need major investment in the court system, okay? Because if you're banning Section 21, you're going to have twice as many hearings, okay? Unless you do it paper-based. And that's why we brought the mediation service out at the PRS, because the government want much more mediation in the process with regard to court landlord and tenant disputes. So my worry is at the back end of the year, we're talking from June, July, August, September onwards, what are the courts going to be like? Because I know they struggle to recruit on finding more judges and bailiffs. So that's my big worry.
I mean, I said at the top of the webinar, this isn't really about Goodlord, but it'd be remiss to not mention the rent protection aspect of our business here, the guys and agents that are joining that don't know. I mean, we've worked really hard to be, I think, the only provider to maintain that level of service throughout, and we're fully aware of all the things Paul's talking about there in terms of the risk that the elongation of the court process takes. But I would suggest now, if you can find a viable way to protect yourself and your landlords against this level of action, because it is going to take longer, then do so. And we're certainly, I believe, well placed to support that. In terms of the actual sort of cost of that process, Paul, now obviously it's going to take longer. Landlord Action are well placed here to envisage what that's going to look like from a cost perspective. Can letting agents and landlords expect it to be a more costly process moving forwards to evict somebody?
No, I mean, look, we charge all in from serving a notice. We charge, £120 plus VAT to serve a notice.
Yeah.
And 55% of the time the tenants will pay up, leave, or do some sort of deal. So, but 45% will have to go to court and issue court proceedings. So from start to finish, we charge the best part of about £1,400. And when I started 20 years ago, I was the first person to start and do fixed fees, because my background was legal, and then I became a landlord after I set up Landlord Action, and I was cheesed off with lawyers charging too much money every time you pick up the phone, every time you write a letter. So we did fixed fees, and in 2012 we became a firm of solicitors, so we're regulated now. Obviously, part of the Hamilton Fraser, our knowledge within the private rental sector is unbelievable. So it's fixed fees. And the landlords, when they go to court, they will get a cost order that goes on the money order and the judgment. The biggest problem that you have, Ollie, it's one thing getting possession, it's another thing getting paid on a money order. And the biggest problem that I had when I sit on these panels, and yes, I've asked the government to say, look, you've got a rogue landlord and rogue letting agent list. What about a bad tenant, rogue tenant list? They won't do that. The biggest problem you've got out of this COVID-19 crisis is homelessness. The councils are at a breaking point. Okay, what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot more evictions, okay, when we come out of this, and actually more and more people who need support. And I think if anything comes out of this, I think it will highlight the government's need to invest majorly. Bearing in mind there's going to be a massive amount of debt out of this as well, because we're beginning to pay for decades to go. I think you're going to see a massive influx of much major investment with regard to social housing.
So let's put your money where your mouth is then, Paul. How long do you reckon? How long do you think this, with what you know now, obviously that's the qualifying criteria, what you know now, how long do you think it will take from start to finish?
Right, so start to finish, let's say you can't do anything until June. You might have served your 3-month notice. You've got to serve your 3-month notice. That's got to expire. Then you've got to issue the claim at court. Normally it used to take 6 to 8 weeks. June, July, August, September, October, November, December. You'll be very lucky to get your property back by the end of the year if you have to go to bailiffs. You'll be very lucky. That's, I mean, and again, it depends on the court you're at. You've got to really, everyone was talking about you need a housing court. My argument is do what you do now, but just put more investment in it, do it better. It's a little bit of a red herring. So realistically, you've got to tell your landlords from June, it could take 6 to 8 months, period.
And
we
with
still
that
charge the same at Landlord Action.
And with that in mind, if you haven't got the support of a rent protection product, a landlord action, a legal firm, it's going to be so important that you keep up to date with the changes to the pre-action protocols. And of course, they're still yet to roll themselves out, but it's pretty safe to assume it's going to include working with the tenants on a basis that maybe you haven't done before, and things like hopefully like our rent relief questionnaire, our templates will help with that. But we were talking about this, Paul, yesterday, and you noted comparisons to the social housing market.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is with the pre-action protocol, it will come in. We don't know when it's going to, but it will come in, and I think it's going to come in where, as an agent, and obviously an agent will have to, if there is a rent arrears case, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find, and it's in the social housing market at the moment. If a tenant goes in arrears, you have to find out if they're vulnerable. You have to find out if they can apply for housing benefit. Do they understand English? Can they understand the legal document? You have to be able to work with them. You have to show lines of engagement. You have to document all correspondence. You have to send them a rent statement for when they went in arrears. There'll be various different measures that one has to do. Once that's done and it's clear the tenant can't pay the rent or there's nothing that can be agreed, and that's why obviously our mediation service at PRS is going to take that aggravation away from landlords and letting agents. is then you'll be able to serve your notice. And all it is, it's another hurdle to stop more cases going to court to gain possession and end up with there being more homelessness and need for housing. That's what's going to happen. There is going to be more barriers. That's why when the Section 21 comes through, and I've said it all along, there is a report that's going to come out which the Letting Industry Council commissioned. We participated with other people, called Beyond Section 21. We were literally going to launch it, and we had it delivered to number 10, and then the COVID-19 virus came out. What's going to happen is I predict that the ban on Section 21, which I think was going to take 2 or 3 years to come in, I think that's going to be accelerated now. I think there'll be pre-action protocol. Maybe notice periods might be longer. I don't know. You'll see a lot more protection for tenants.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we kind of agree on that in terms of the Section 21 changes. It's not so much a good excuse to do it, but it's in the pipeline. It feels like any mass change will try and do it one time if they can.
Correct. Correct.
You know, I mean, the process for serving notices, obviously you've been through already, which I really appreciate, but just the physical process of it, in actually delivering that, you noted an online application there to deliver that notice. How should agents who haven't got the support of subsidiary firms approach actually serving a notice in these times?
Well, I mean, you know what? We're serving dozens of notices a week at Landlord Action, and we dot our I's and cross our T's. And the amount of notices that we see wrong from letting agents and from landlords, that's why they made the 6A so easy when we drafted it. And I did some drafting on that. It was so easy because the old one was you have to end it a day before the rental period. Email service for us is not deemed as service. If you go to court, okay, we never serve notices by email, okay, because the judge won't accept it under CPR directions. Normally it goes first class mail, but the problem you have, a tenant can deny receiving it, okay, or you can send it recorded delivery. Again, it depends what it says in the tenancy agreement, because obviously there's various different provisions. You can send it recorded delivery, but if you don't sign it, it's not served, Ollie. So what we do is, we normally hand deliver notices, okay? I know obviously we're in lockdown and there's still agents going out there, give or take, and yes, you don't want to meet your tenant and all that, but you know what? And I used to be a process server, so I used to, I've even hidden inside the industrial wheelie bins on a council estate in Clapham, serving papers on people. So I know all about serving papers. When you get a document, we would normally say, put it through the letterbox with a newspaper and take a picture. Because you know what? If you're waiting 3 months now for the notice to be expiring, why would you cut corners with regard to serving notice? You know, one slight mistake or one judge that may be tenant friendly when they're going to court and saying, hold on a second, you sent this or did it, how do you know the tenant received it? Because tenants say they don't receive it. So we do belt and braces at Landlord Action. We've used every trick in the book to make sure that we can persuade a judge at court in our witness statement to say it's been served. And I would say the same with letting agents. Yes, I know there's letting agents still going out there, and I know, is it essential, this, that, whatever. It may be that if you don't want to go out, maybe your landlord would serve it. I know there's obviously provisions and there's lock-ins and whatever, or maybe you wait for notices to be served until obviously the lock-in rules have been released. But there's no substitute for hand delivering it. Put it through a letterbox. Don't give it to the tenant personally. Take a picture with a newspaper. Best evidence. And
just to confirm, because I'm conscious of time here, everyone online, the new legislation applies to every process, doesn't it, Paul? It's, as you said earlier, it's not, if you've served a section previous to that, you are still bound by the stay in courts, for example. You're not going to be able to get your case moving forwards anytime soon until that's lifted. Correct. Until that's lifted, we're all in limbo. We've got to wait until the 25th of June. If you serve notice prior to 26th of March, you can use that notice. Section 21 has a 6-month lifespan. You can use those notices. You can issue claims. We have been issuing claims under Section 8 just to put our case in the system. So we've got a case number and it's adjourned, but at least we're there. But I mean, I would recommend that if agents want some advice, feel free to call our Landlord Action advice line, and we can help you and assist you and take some of the aggravation away as well. Sure. So very quickly, I just want to cover the pre-tenancy process. I'm conscious of time, guys, and I appreciate you all staying online just over the hour. Obviously, we've seen changes to the right to rent checks. They now no longer have to be done in person, which mostly makes complete sense from a social distancing point of view. And I think we've talked about utilising tech and aiding remote working already. And I fear pitching Goodlord too much will alienate even more people. But the point on this slide I think is so important is the compliance point. Is that letting agents and landlords really have to meet all the current compliance virtues, don't they, that are currently in place. They can't forgo those just because of COVID-19, because then they could run the risk of further damage to any process thereafter if it was to go to court, for example. Is that right?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's harder now being a letting agent and landlord than ever before, but actually it's a great opportunity for letting agents, explaining what a landlord has to do. I do this when I do my pitches when I go into letting agents' office, because they don't sell themselves enough, so they don't pitch in the right manner and right landlording language.
Yeah.
You explain what you have to do and how you have to do it and when you have to do it and what you have to do. Those let-only landlords will be giving you their keys and saying, I want full management. And that's where I think a lot of agents miss a trick. Yes, you are protecting. I think let-only, by the way, just another point, Ollie, is going to go. Let-only service will eventually go. It'll be, I'll find you a tenant, Ollie. It's that person there. You deal with the paperwork. We're not going to get involved. I think that's going to happen more in the future because of the tenant fee ban and the charge. So the compliance stuff, then it's endless. Okay. Our biggest problem in our industry is the enforcement is weak across the board. You know, there's good agents, and the majority of agents out there are really good. There are some really, unfortunately, dare I say it, some rogue agents, and I always make sure that I expose them on the TV program. I'm exposing 2 dodgy letting agents in East London, actually, who are stealing rents, who give good agents a bad name. But, you know, you are compliance officers now. You know, you have compliance divisions within your managing agent departments, you know, explaining that you're going to protect them from being fined by right to rent, or you're not going to get fined by the council because of the HMO license, you know, or the deposit, you're not going to get fined 3 times plus. Explaining all that, you know, and the fear factor to your landlord is so important. They need to appreciate the good work you do.
No, I think it's a fair point. And if anyone wants to support on that, or indeed to run through how either of our businesses, Goodlord or Hamilton Fraser and Landlord Action, can support that, then I'm sure we're more than happy to do so. As I said earlier, we sent out a blog yesterday with all the attachments around managing communications with tenants and landlords, around managing missed rental payments, along with the rent relief questionnaire. Given the statement Paul made today around the pre-action protocols, I'd urge you to look at the rent relief questionnaire, add to it, take away from it. Hopefully some part of that is useful. If you are interested more about Goodlord, you can book a call with our sales team. We are fully active. We've been remote working, I think, a week and a half ahead of the actual lockdown. It's the beauty of being a relatively young tech company. We are here to support you as much as we possibly can. And I know as well, when we follow up with the recording of this webinar, Paul and Hamilton Fraser and that group of businesses have put together an offer for you as well, which is exclusive to this webinar. So you will all get a copy of that.
Yeah, and if I just have a quick reference, we've launched about 3 weeks ago. You know, I've been working on advice lines for years. We've set up hfassist.co.uk. It is a letting agent practical advice line. We have ex-letting agents and paralegals working. We've trained them in such a way that when you call up, we will answer a practical question, a practical answer, rather than when you speak to a law firm, it's all woolly and fluffy and whatever. We understand what it is. So it's a real practical advice. And I mean, it's about £240 a year to join, but we put a discount code for any Goodlord customer to have a discount.
Fantastic. We'll send that out. And in line with that as well, you may have well seen in the press what Goodlord have done in terms of an offer to customers, or indeed new customers. It's pay as you get paid. We're looking to support letting agents as much as possible, and we kind of figure that the utilisation of this kind of tech now is probably more important than ever before. So if you're interested to understand how that works, please get in touch. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. We haven't had time to Q&A, so we'll come back in writing to all the questions were submitted prior to the webinar. But really appreciate your time, and hopefully that's added value to you guys as letting agents and landlords.
And I've got my T-shirt on, look.
And keep calm and carry on letting. On that note,
it's a medium as well. It's a medium, not a large.
Sure it is. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.